What's an asset list, and how can we use it to be able to maximize our happiness as men before getting into a long-term relationship? Let's talk about it here today. Getting into a long-term relationship is one of the most fulfilling things that many people do in their lives. Is it possible to be able to go through life without a long-term relationship and still have a relationship with God which is infinitely deep and simultaneously fulfilling? Absolutely it is. 100% it is. But a lot of Christians deeply feel that they desire to be in a long-term relationship, usually a relationship that involves marriage in some regard. And it causes a lot of people a lot of stress and strain, let me tell you. The number of people that I end up meeting with on a monthly basis who request some time to be able to just sit down, have a drink, grab a coffee, and just tell me about their lives and where they are, not only in their faith journey, but in their journey of singleness is really too many to count some months. And there really are kind of a lot of trends that I see kind of over time, and a lot of trends for women, and we'll certainly cover those in other videos. But today I want to talk about some practical solutions for men. Now, in terms of me and my life, there have been two long-term relationships that got to the point where it would have made sense that the next stage would have been to get engaged. Now, neither of them ended up resulting in a formal engagement, but that is the extent to which those two relationships got. And let me tell you something, when you get to that point where you've been single and maybe you haven't wanted to be single, and you spend a lot of time thinking about maybe even beating yourself up for not being in a relationship, then you get into a relationship, and then it gets so serious to the point where you're ready to take that next step in terms of getting married. I think a lot of people think that you're going to be, over the moon excited, you won't have any doubts in your head whatsoever. It's going to be pure excitement and almost pure ecstasy to have your person, quote unquote. But a lot of people don't end up feeling that. Instead, they end up feeling a little bit scared at that point, because all of a sudden there's this sense of like, it's here. And there's also this sense of kind of thinking back over and evaluating our lives as single individuals before we met that person. And it's happened with me, it's happened with so many, countless people that I've talked to, where they describe a similar situation of saying, wow, I gave myself such a hard time for being single. I really beat myself up about it. I made that my number one priority. I complained about it to my friends, to my family members. I was so angry with God. Where was my person? Where's my person? Am I a good person? I see other people, getting partners. Why not me? This constant cycle of kind of anger and shame and almost the self-application of brokenness to our lives, almost as if we want to stay broken, to give God the opportunity to come in and heal us, quote, quote, in the form of a partner. That if God doesn't give us a partner, then it means that God doesn't love us, almost challenging God to say, God, if you really loved us, then you would X, Y, and Z, right? Almost like a petulant child, right? A spoiled child demanding something from their parent when our parent is the one who gave us everything that we have in the first place. And that's how we can be sometimes with God. But when we look back at that time of being single, we realize that there were a lot of blessings that we did not count at the time. Something as simple as, I got the whole bed to myself. I didn't have to worry about the temperature in my room when I went to sleep, right? Things like, in terms of, let's say you want to buy a car. What car do you want to buy? You're a classic guy, you love cars, right? So what car? Maybe you want a mid-engine Corvette. You want a Corvette C8. That's your dream car, right? And let's say that you have the money to be able to buy it. You're a single guy, you buy it, you don't have to explain it, you don't have to think about it or anything like that, right? But then you have the blessing of having a partner. And your partner drives a 2002 Toyota Corolla, and the thing is barely functioning, it's breaking apart, whatever it is. If you go and buy current year, like a brand spanking new C8 mid-engine Corvette, you're a douche. Okay, that is not a thing to do, okay? Now, I wish it was and you wouldn't have to feel bad about it, but the likelihood is high that, especially if you're a good husband, you'd feel pretty guilty about going and doing that while your wife or whatever is puttering around in this broken down Corolla. Not that there's anything wrong with Toyota Corollas, by the way. I've had a 2004 Honda Element for 17 years when this video is being made. Now, to be fair, I've been living outside of the country most of those years, so the thing only has like 100,000 miles on it, and I love that car. Functions totally fine. Doesn't matter anything else going on, in life. I love my car. What can I say, right? I'm looking to upgrade it now because it's been 17 years, but at the same time, it's also a car that gets me from A to B. What can I say? So instead, the likelihood is exceptionally high that instead of you going and getting, the year that I'm making this video is 2020, but getting a 2020 C8 Corvette, you're going to get two 2014 or 2015 moderate mileage, but really reliable Buicks. That's what you're going to buy. And there is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's the responsible thing to do. But when you have to make that decision, I can almost guarantee, no matter how great of a husband you are, you're probably going to look back and say, if I was single, I could have gotten the Corvette. Could have gotten that Corvette. If I wanted to buy that car, I could have bought that car, right? And the same thing, you're going to bed one day, all of a sudden, you go to the restroom, you come back or whatever, and your wife has almost like a tuna can grabbed on to the blankets and wrapped herself in them. You got nothing. You try to yank it away. There's no luck. You better go and get another blanket or whatever and go back to sleep, okay? These sorts of things are things you would never have to think about as a single person. What are you doing on the weekends, right? You got one night, all you want to do is play video games. You could go and do that. Now you have to think about the other person's desires and wishes and these things. You want to eat all the junk food or whatever at a certain restaurant, you could go and do that. Now you have responsibilities. Now I can tell you that, especially as a man, that taking on responsibilities voluntarily and really taking on that battle, because that's what taking on responsibilities is, right? It's basically going into battle. Taking those on gives you the opportunity to be able to essentially show your mettle, as they would say, right? And this gives us as men a really deep sense of satisfaction. So I'm not saying that you're giving things up and you're getting nothing. Quite the opposite, right? But it would be a mistake to believe that simply because you're in a relationship or getting married, that you are definitely going to be so much happier, everything is going to be better. This is, your dream woman, and so you'll never argue and never have disagreements, and you're always going to agree on everything, and you're not going to have any rough times, etc. Statistically, over 60% of individuals in the United States, at least, who self-report feeling lonely all or most of the time are married and living with their spouse. Think about that for a minute. Over half of all Americans who say I'm always lonely or I almost always feel lonely, they're not only married, but they're married and living with their spouse. Now, divorce rate right now, it's a little bit lower than it was when I was growing up, I would say. This is probably about like 40-ish%, something like that, right? So think about that, right? So I got 60% of people or whatever who stay married. Of that 60%, what it's saying is a massive chunk of that, they're not happily married couples, right? There is a real misconception that being married equals being happy, or being married somehow represents being further along in this arbitrary conception of a race of life. We're always trying to get ahead, especially these days with technology and social media. We're all comparing ourselves against other people, and we're doing ourselves a disservice, and we're doing our sense of gratitude towards what God has given us a disservice by constantly comparing with everybody else, and we don't count our own blessings. I struggle with it. Everybody struggles with it. If you say that you don't, you're lying, and I'm sorry, right? But yet,
sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Even Siri is having trouble understanding. She just doesn't get it. Just kidding. So what happens when it comes to relationships, right, is that we oftentimes put so much pressure on them, and we put unfair pressure on our partners to be all of these things that no human being could ever be, right? God is the only one who is truly unconditionally loving. It is simply not fair to tell or expect of our partner to be unconditionally loving no matter what we do, how we act towards them, how we act towards ourselves, our decisions, attitudes, etc. Right? It's not fair to be able to put that on them, right? And when we do, it puts a lot of tension into that relationship, a lot of pressure on that relationship. So it is really important to take a moment to appreciate being single. And as a young man, and a young man can be 60, and a young man can be 14 years old, right? As a young man, and we are all young in our walk with God, there are certain things that we can do while single that are easier to do while we're single than when we are actually in a long-term relationship. The question is not if you are single. I frankly don't care, okay? My question is, what are you doing with that time that God has allotted to you? Being single, that is my question for you, okay? And this is really tough because there's, per usual, no right way to do it. There's just a whole lot of wrong ways, and you know what I mean, right? So there's 4 suggestions that I have, and they're things that I've done in my own life, and they're things that I've helped clients do in terms of coaching clients, and they're things that, you know, I tell my mentees to do. And generally speaking, they've been helpful, at least to an extent, in terms of getting a framework, because we as men, we like logic, we like predictability. Why do we like predictability? It gives us a sense of control, right? Control and domination. Domination, a lot of people in like contemporary culture see like the concept of men wanting to dominate their environments as being some horrific, toxic thing, and it is not. Per usual, anything can be taken to an extreme, right? No human being should dominate another human being, okay? But a man's sense, deep drive to dominate their environment is a drive to have a sufficient amount of control, and we're operationalizing control as predictability. So if I, wake up this morning and I've got 10 banana trees outside, I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and I got 10 banana trees outside, right? This all goes back to these evolutionary roots of survival and replication, right? That requires a sense of stability. And this is what men most deeply desire, not only in relationships, but in our lives in general, is a deep, deep sense of stability. And we're defining that, right, as predictability, which is control, which requires domination. That's what it is, okay? So, and one of the reasons is that people, they mistake domination and subjugation and think they're the same thing. They're not. They overlap in very unfortunate circumstances, okay? But I am not talking about subjugation. I am talking about the concept of domination of one's life, of exploring the frontier, etc. And that is deeply healthy masculinity, and you should never apologize for having that drive. It is a beautiful drive that God has put into the hearts of man. So this gets us to the asset list. What the heck is an asset list? Now, technically speaking, an asset is something that if you have it, it's going to add or preserve worth. Now, there's some things obviously where I'll talk about like having a nice car as being an asset. Now, technically, some people would say it's not an asset because it's depreciating so much that you should only call something an asset if it's increasing in value over time. And I understand what you would be thinking. When I use the term asset for the context of this episode, what I'm talking about is essentially acquiring something that grants us the perception of domination, right? A perception of greater control, and which in some cases represents what anthropologists, what evolutionary psychologists would refer to as a true display, which we can go through some other time. But what I want to talk about first is the concept of developing a luxury asset list, right? This isn't something where you need to spend all your money acquiring these things. What I want you to do is to think about a list of things. It could be a house, it could be a car, it could be a Rolex watch, it could be whatever you want, it could be nice clothes. I don't care what it is. It's going to be totally unique to you, right? But a list of things that it would be easier to acquire if you could spend all of your money on yourself relative to yourself and a family, okay? Making that list is going to be a lot of fun. I want you to do your research. So if you say, I want to buy a Rolex, and you want a Data Just 2, which is a model of Rolex, right? Maybe you go online, you go onto the website, think about it almost like building a vision board, right? You select the thing that you want, find out how much it costs, put it in an Excel sheet. I'm a huge Excel sheet guy, right? So put that in there. You can even have a link to the specific model that you want. What is it? How much does it cost? Where can you find it? Okay? So that's going to be the first thing, right? Whatever you want, like I said, this is going to be totally different between different men, right? But anything, just like I said with this C8 convertible, where it could be perceived as really selfish, if you had a family and that long-term relationship, etc., and you were spending the money on that, okay? So that is step number one in terms of your asset list is going to be luxury assets. Number two is making a list of expensive. Now, expensive doesn't have to mean, $10,000 a day. It could just be more than you would normally allocate to going on a vacation somewhere, okay? Or having some kind of an experience, whatever it is. So to give you an example, for me, it was never to go to go clubbing in Ibiza or go, to Santorini. So it could be something like for me, where it was I wanted to become the first psychologist to ever lecture at all 8 Ivy League universities, as well as Oxford and Cambridge. I called it the academic Everest. It was just a challenge that I set myself, and it was something that I wanted to accomplish, not because I was going to get paid for it or anything like that. It was just something that I set myself. It was a challenge that I set myself, okay? And that's what I wanted. And let me tell you, flying back and forth from the US to the UK, driving up and down the coast, staying in hotels, paying for meals on the road, these things cost a lot of money, okay? And it was something where I was able to spend that money because I was single, because I wasn't in a relationship. I didn't have anyone else that I needed to share my resources with. Now, obviously, it would be outdated for me to say that your partner is unlikely to bring resources and assets of their own into the relationship. I am not suggesting that. All I am doing is saying that there's certain things that if you don't have to think about the possibility of having to share your financial resources with someone else, you're more likely to be able to allow yourself to spend money on these sorts of things. So the next thing that was for me was to be able to be the first psychologist to lecture on all 7 continents. So right now I got 6 of them down, right? All when I was single, right? And speaking on every continent except for Antarctica. So if you're watching this, you can help me get to Antarctica to be able to give a psych lecture. Please let me know. You can genuinely, actually really help me out. I'd appreciate it, okay? So that's the second thing I want you to make a list of, right? What are some expensive vacations that maybe aren't things you've ever dreamt of doing with a partner? Those things, save them. Save them to be able to do it with a partner. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's somewhere there's no need to have a partner to go and do those things. In fact, like when I go and lecture, I like to do that by myself. I'm really zoned in. I'm in the zone when I'm going and lecturing at universities or for churches, etc. I like to do that by myself. And obviously, if I have a partner, maybe I'll have a partner who they always want to travel with me. Well, some of these trips have been, many thousands of dollars per week, right? Like many thousands of dollars per week to get them done. And it's just been a lot easier for me to do them. I've had a lot more freedom to do them financially being single, okay? So that's the second piece. The third piece, the third thing I want you to make a list of is different experiences that are, to be frank, dangerous experiences. Things that any good woman would basically tell you, you're out of your mind and you're not going to do it, okay? Right? So for example, being single last year, right? I went shark cage diving, did the highest bungee jump in the world in South Africa, any number of the wingsuit diving, skydiving. I went stock car racing in a NASCAR, like an actual NASCAR racing around with 8 other cars in Virginia. A lot of these different things, which frankly are just like a little stupid, some of them, let's be honest, right? But there are certain things, right? I've seen, unfortunately, my grandparents, all 4 of them, grow old and pass away. And when you have those experiences where you see the physical bodies of people that you deeply love, literally, essentially, begin the process of death, right? Of passing away, of the bodies. It's entropy. Everything breaks apart, right? In terms of physical biology. And so it's one of these things where when I saw that, I started to think, there's certain things I want my body to experience. I want to feel, how does it feel to run a marathon and finish it? How does it feel to get on a skateboard and, do an ollie and, grind a rail. What does it feel like to do those things? And it's easier to do them when you're younger and you have your health, or at least if nothing else, before you get to the point where, your joints start failing, maybe you're breaking bones, which of course you got more experiences, you're more likely to do, etc. Okay. So because of that, it was a great opportunity for me, being single, to be able to go out and do these things, which on the one hand, are they dangerous? Sure. But on the other hand, I like dangerous things. These are things where the likelihood is that I would stop myself, if I'm being honest, from doing some of them that are very dangerous that I've already done, if I had a partner, because some have been very dangerous, and I'm very pleased that I did them, frankly. But I also know that if I had a partner, probably I'd drive them crazy. And for certain things like shark cage diving, if you have a wife and she is actively encouraging you to get into a cage and go swimming with sharks, you probably have more issues in that relationship other than just that, okay? Same thing with jumping out of planes and these things. Every now and again, you find somebody who loves that kind of stuff too. What a beautiful thing, right? You can go and do it together. That's awesome. For me, I'm not really looking for somebody where the top thing they've ever wanted to do is to jump out of a plane. It's just not me, right? At the same time, I'm glad that I've done those things. It's been a big blessing for me. So make a list of those dangerous things, where you could do them, and some things that they may cost a lot of money, but they're kind of dumb guys things. Like, for example, driving a tank. There's several places in the US where you can go and get an actual military grade retired tank and drive it around and fire shells. That is something that makes no sense, but I'm kind of into it. I kind of like to do that, right? Or shooting a rocket launcher and these sorts of things. It's a real guy thing, right? Kind of dumb. I'm kind of into it. I don't apologize for wanting to do that kind of stuff. It's a great opportunity to make a list of those things and pursue them when you're single. You have the time and the resources, and there's not that much holding you back. And the final thing, it's not an asset in terms of, owning a house, and it's not an asset in terms of having an experience under your belt, but rather it's a different kind of asset, and the asset is a skill set that you can develop, right? And now, some people may call them man skills or whatever you want to call them, right? But there are certain skill sets that I think that really promote a sense of control, right? A sense of dominance. And the ability to rely on one's own skill set over having to use the skill sets of others usually makes men feel fulfilled. So for example, if my toilet breaks down and I need to replace it, right? I can do that myself. Or let's say that, my oil needs to be changed, or the tire is blowing off on the side of the road, or anything like that, right? It usually feels good to, if nothing else, know how to handle those situations. To be honest with you, you may be terrible at it, right? Not everybody's great at these skills. It doesn't mean that you're not a man if you don't know how to change a tire, okay? It does not. You can pay somebody else, in the States, you'd call AAA, they'll come out and change it. But it feels good to know how to do it. It really does. I don't want you to feel pressured into learning these skills. But it does give you a genuine sense of satisfaction. And let's say that, you're not in school anymore, maybe you don't have a father figure in your life, etc., and you're an adult. They have things I've taken these, they call them ACE classes, adult continuing education classes. I've taken them in plumbing, I've taken them in auto repair, auto shop type stuff. I've taken them in a lot of, electrical repair, drywall, you name it. They have these classes that you can take, and they have been phenomenal experiences for me because I wasn't someone who had those skills. My skills were intellectual skills. I've got 2 doctorates, I've got so many dozens of publications, I've published multiple books. That's my skill set, okay? If you're trying to tell me that that has less or more value than knowing how to change a muffler, it's up to debate, right? But I think that it gives you, especially men, I think it gives us a real good sense to be able to do things with our hands in terms of to control our environment, to be able to build things, fix things, etc. So if you want to make a list of those things, a list of those skills that you would like to acquire, I think that that is a really great thing. And you can put some things on there that maybe you don't really want to learn, but you in your head, you're like, I probably should learn how to do that. But then I also want you to put things on there that maybe they're not an absolute necessity, but you really want to learn how to do them. So maybe you want to learn archery, or maybe, like you've always wanted to learn like the actual rules, like rule by rule of like basketball or, American football. So you can actually like follow a team, like a local team. Like I'm in Washington, D.C., so we got Washington Redskins for our American football team. You want to be able to do those, or you want to start learning some new skill set like stamp collecting, whatever it is, but these are skill sets and knowledge bases that you want to develop. It is so much easier to pursue these areas of knowledge and get really deeply engrossed when you're single. Of course, you can still do these things when you're in a relationship. There's no doubt about that. But personal development, you just have more time for it. As I always say, right, it's not being single, it's what are you doing with that time. Being single does not mean that you're incomplete. It doesn't mean that you can't be the best version of yourself. And it certainly doesn't mean that that best version that you get to when you're single will not be challenged. Not just in good ways, but in bad ways. When you get into a relationship and when you get married, right? We would be doing relationships a disservice to be able to say that everything is always wonderful all the time. It's not the case. But it is a deep blessing when you do end up in those relationships. My general feeling is that by pursuing God and pursuing faith and seeing what God has to offer us in the season of singleness, that is truly the fastest way to be able to become self-fulfilled. There's no reason to speed as fast as we can towards finding someone to be in a relationship with, but I do want you to deeply desire in your heart an ever-growing intensity of your relationship and your encounters with God, such that you can really feel loved up all the time, and then at the same time be so really plugged into God, as it were, right, mentally, that you would know what He desires for you. He's given you so many skill sets. He's given you so many natural temperamental abilities, things that you're naturally good at, that He wants you to explore those things. And maybe He knows better than you do, better than I do, certainly, right? The things that are going to make you truly, truly fulfilled and happy. And you should do that walking with Him as opposed to walking against Him or putting pressure on Him or shaming and being angry with Him because, you don't have somebody to steal your covers and to make you buy a Buick instead of a Corvette, right? That's the message for today. I appreciate you and God bless you as always. As always, if you want to get in touch and book some coaching sessions with me, I would love to be able to work with you. Please go ahead and follow the details below. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed that episode and you'd like to see more original content, then please do click on one of the links right here. I hope to see you in the next one.